My second attempt was to use a similar hierarchical nested approach, but this time by breaking the camera from the default motion path to create a steeper angle. I'll just turn on my my cameras so that you can see them in the scene, and I'll come out of the shot camera view just so that we can actually sort of take a look at them in a sort of slightly different perspective. Okay, so you can see the cameras are now much more steeply facing. If we just take a look at from the perspective of one of those, oops, I didn't want to do that. We just take a look at the perspective from one of those cameras. Just 1 second while I find them. So that's from the first camera perspective. We can see that we're looking much more steeply, almost orthographically, at this scene, and we can see that because of that we're getting a much more sort of straight up representation of the texture without any of that sort of excessive smearing that's caused by the glancing angle. If we just compare that, for example, if we just come out of that view and we just compare that with one of the standard layered projections, if I just turn those on, you can see that because these are much lower to the ground, that's why we're getting all that perspective distortion as we go through, and that's why we would literally need so many of those cameras to avoid that smearing that's naturally occurring because of that glancing angle that these cameras are actually getting of the ground surface. Okay, so we're now looking much more steeply, and we can see that by doing that I've managed to reduce what could have been potentially 20, 25, even up to 30 cameras to get down this space using the shot camera's motion path, which is clearly unviable. I've managed to get this entire projection now within 6, or broadly within 6 projections. And if we take a look at it from the shot camera's perspective, we can see the benefits on that checkerboard. We can see that we're not getting any of that smearing now. We're getting a good transfer of resolution. So there's no issue of the cameras needing to be spaced more closely together. We're getting good resolution through the whole thing. There's possibly some issues with coverage here, but that might well be mitigated when the buildings are in place. So that would need to be checked. But by and large, you can see that that's a much better solution. However, this in itself does create an additional problem. Which is where to terminate the projections with the alpha channels. Again, if we look at this sort of from the front down, we can see that these projections are nested, and we can see that where they terminate, they're not necessarily terminating in places that are conducive to natural termination points on the geometry. We can see these intersections here where the crossroads come across the main street, and we can see that these. If I just put the shading with lines on, we can probably see this a bit better. So we can see that they're not necessarily terminating. Look at that one, for example. It's terminating right in the middle of an open expanse. That'd be very difficult to cut off. That one probably not quite so much. I could terminate along that curve. But there are issues along the way. That one terminates in space. That one terminates in space on this side. So there are issues with the termination spaces, and of course there are also issues with coverage, which particularly in this area, where I'm almost certain that's going to expose an absence of coverage in those areas. Okay, so this is a much better solution, but it isn't entirely resolving the issue.